This video is an explanation of the reading comp passage about Tulip Mania. This could be watched in conjunction with any question about the passage. Of course, each question is explained in its own video explanation. And I will say, if you're answering several questions about this passage, I would urge you not to watch this particular video until you've answered all the questions you're going to answer. That way you answer those questions with your own understanding of the passage. So here's the short first paragraph. At the peak of Tulip Mania in Holland in March 1637, some single tulip bowls sold for more than 10 times the annual income of a skilled craftsman. It is generally considered the first recorded speculative bubble. The term Tulip Mania now is often used metaphorically to refer to any large economic bubble, when asset prices deviate from intrinsic values. And so interesting, this first paragraph tells us about this historical event, the so-called Tulip Mania, which happened in 1637 in Holland. And it's considered economically important in economic history because it's the first speculative bubble. And so now this term is used metaphorically in the modern world. It's used to refer to a large speculative bubble when lots of money is being paid for something, much more money than its intrinsic value. Second paragraph. This event was popularized in 1841 by British journalist Charles Mackay. According to Mackay, at one point, 12 acres of land were offered for a Semper Augustus bulb. Mackay claims that many such investors were ruined by the fall in prices, and Dutch commerce suffered a severe shock. Some modern scholars, however, feel that the mania was not quite as extraordinary as Mackay described. Some even argue that not enough price data remain historically to present an all-out tulip bowl bubble. And so, in other words, it sounds like 200 years after the fact, this became very popular because this journalist wrote about it, this British journalist. And it sounds like he made it sound like a really big deal, and some modern scholars are thinking maybe he exaggerated a bit. Maybe there's just not enough evidence that it was as big a deal as he thought. In her 2007 scholarly analysis, Tulip Mania, Anne Goldager states that the phenomena was limited, quote, to a fairly small group, unquote, and that most accounts from the period are based on a few contemporary pieces of propaganda. While Mackay's account held that a wide array of society was involved in tulip trade, Goldager's study of archived contracts found that even at its peak, the trade in tulips was conducted almost exclusively by merchants and skilled craftsmen who were wealthy, but not by members of the nobility. Thus, any economic fallout from the bubble was very limited. So in other words, it was not everyone who was involved. It was just a certain class of rich merchants and rich skilled craftsmen. So it was a very limited group of people. It was not all of Holland. The paragraph continues. Goldager, who identified many prominent buyers and sellers in the market, found fewer than half a dozen who experienced any financial troubles in the period, and even of these cases it is not clear that tulips were to blame. So in other words, it seems like even of the people who did participate, there was not a major financial crisis. In other words, it was only a few that had any problems, and it wasn't even clear that their problems were related to the tulips at all. This is not altogether surprising, says the author. And so the author is agreeing that it sounds logical that it wasn't an all-out thing, that it was a relatively limited thing. Although prices had risen, money had not changed hands between buyers and sellers. Thus, profits were never realized for sellers. And so it's not much of a speculative bubble if money doesn't change hands. If money doesn't change hands, then there's going to be no big economic impact. And the author just adds, unless sellers had made other purchases on credit in expectation of the profits, the collapse in prices did not cause anyone to lose money. And so very interesting. So we're presented with this phenomena, this historical phenomena. The second paragraph tells us about Charles Mackay, who said it was a really big idea. Some people were skeptical, and it sounds like this woman, Goldager, did some really serious research and found that it was very, very small, and it was not such a big deal at all.